Okay, welcome to our Week in Bucky call, November 18 to 19, depending on where you are. Next week is in America is Thanksgiving, but
Mhm.
we'll still be here, I think, doing this without any problem. Glad to see everybody here. John, how are you feeling tonight, and what do you intend to get out of tonight's call?
I'm feeling great. Another beautiful day in Perth, a little warm. So we're headed for increasing temperatures to about 37, 38 midweek, which is quite warm. I prefer 27, 28. I've had a walk in the park, which was beautiful before it got too hot. I've closed the house up now and turned the air conditioning on. But yeah, always happy to study Bucky, always learn more out of it. The relevance is shaped by the world and what's happening around us. So there's certainly a lot happening around us. I would like to understand the insanity just a little bit better. So yes, glad to be here and hope to know a little more by the end of the call than I do now. So Manu, how do you feel and what do you hope to take out of today?
Glad to be awoken, glad of the day. I don't know what the day is going to pan out to be because I haven't looked at whatever forecast that is for today, but it sounds like it's going to be a good day too because it's not cold this morning. It's fresh, but if I go to yesterday, it will be good. I'm just happy to continue learning the most and seeing the practical side of what we learn and seeing the application and what we can do to leverage and impact our environment in a way that is significant. So, Anne, how do you feel? What do you expect?
Yeah, thank you, Manu. Okay, I'm glad to be back. It also out of the cold and the wet. It was raining and and very the sky was dreary, but I kind of liked it to experience that in Europe, right? So I'm really glad to be back here in the warmth. So that's one, and to catch up with what I've missed. And 2 weeks back, I think Manu, you talked about you gave this, I think, in our chat, something about thoughts that goes all the way to destiny. Yeah, I just want to say I really like that, and I want to explore that a little bit further because normally it stops at results, yeah, but this goes all the way to behavior, character, and destiny. I really like that, so I would love to explore that. Okay, so and I think that what Bucky talks about and all that sets the right foundation for us to head to the destiny that is for the world rather than for us as individuals. Yeah. Okay, and Steve, how do you feel today, and what would you like to take away?
I feel really good. It's getting to be winter here. It's dark at early 30, and so it throws me off a little bit. And yet, because of daylight saving time, we start an hour earlier than normal, so it's totally got me backwards. I wanted to mention that Joe is in Greece doing a Stoicism workshop retreat thing, and I've seen a couple of reports from him. But he's visiting the Oracle at Delphi today, and so we'll wait and get his report next week. He's probably from the Oracle. He's probably getting everything he needs. Last week we're doing Critical Path, and last week was really eventful because in last week's time, Bucky was talking about how he had made plans for a giant geodesic dome that would be 390 feet, roughly speaking, and it would be for like a fair, and it would teach people about the nature of the planet and how together we were. He had this idea that there would be inside of this giant dome, there would be a 200-foot inside of this 390-foot giant exterior dome. There'd be a 200-foot little dome inside of it where people could go around and see the Earth spinning and rotating, and it would have light bulbs on it. Back in Bucky's day, they had light bulbs. They didn't have LEDs. And then this globe would unfold into a flat Dymaxion map showing all of the landmass in one big island. And then he could show the news and different news going on, because he'd hoped that by then they'd have TV video monitors that would be able to show the news going on in each region and everything. Well, what's interesting is that over the last summer, we just had a giant sphere open up in Las Vegas. And this giant sphere, oh crud, I got rid of it. Hang on a second. I pushed the wrong button and out it went. This giant sphere is 400 feet in diameter, not 300. And it doesn't have a globe inside of it. It has a, let me see, that was the ticket sales. I don't think I wanted ticket sales. Shoot, I had the perfect thing open up, and then I closed it down. Sphere, I think this is the one right here. Okay, so here's the sphere. And on the outside, it has its own LED screen showing pictures of different stuff, as you can see. And on the inside, this giant dome is showing a lot of different things. I'm going to let it cycle through one more time. So the outside shows different pictures than on the inside. And then here's, are we going to, yeah, there's the eyeball. Okay, that's cool. And on the inside, it's structured as a giant amphitheater thing, which is nowhere close to what Bucky was talking about. Bucky wanted to have a ball out here in the middle. This has instead, it has a giant auditorium, and U2 is in residency for the next, I don't know, they signed for so many months to be there every Friday and Saturday night. And they're doing these concerts, and their joint is filling up every weekend with this giant sphere. But I just thought that that was kind of interesting that Bucky in 1985 or 6, when this book came out, he talked about having a giant geodesic dome that would be able to teach people about the planet and their relationships in the planet. And here now in 2013, we have a dome almost the same size that Bucky designed, but it's selling tickets for a U2 show. I just thought that that was kind of interesting. That was one of the things we talked about last week. Any comments or questions on this puppy, on the sphere or anything there?
Yes, I drove almost 5 hours to Cornwall to for the Eden project. And that one, the spheres, you know, and they have you seen that, the Eden project?
No, it's called the Eden
Is this
Project?
on the coast where the plants grow much larger than normal and everything's surreal? Is that?
It's the domes, and inside the domes, they you pull out the pictures. Yes, images.
Here's Eden Project.
And what I understand, somebody mentioned that these domes were they were using the tetrahedrons and all that. This is under Buckminster Fuller's based on his scientific design. Yes, you know. So I was there, and we went inside, and what they did was they replicated a whole tropical forest inside one of the domes, and another dome had a Mediterranean what do you call vegetation, and they literally replicated that. But I think that the one that's much more fascinating is the Garden by the Bay. Garden by the Bay in Singapore. Because when I went there, they told me that the people least fascinated are the ones coming from our side, my side of the world. Because it's literally the tropical forest inside, and we are in the tropical environment, right? So it's they have a what is that? There is a restaurant that is enclosed inside a dome structure.
The first picture I showed had 3 beautiful domes while you were talking. I don't know if you saw those.
That is the Eden project.
Yeah.
So Garden, do you see on the left side? but that one I don't think they used this Bucky's
Design.
technology.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But this one, under the Singapore government, inside is fascinating because the whole, when you walk in, it's wow, every corner, you know, from the waterfalls to the way they put the vegetation in place. But the one in Eden project, they took a clay pit. It's a huge clay pit that no longer could support plants and things like this, and they turned it into a beautiful, that like that exactly. I went there to check out to see how we could collaborate with them from our biosphere, but in the end, they're not so collaborative. They just want to teach, you know. But we're going to collaborate with the one up north, the second Eden project that's coming up in northeastern part of UK. Yeah.
So wonderful. So we're definitely living in a crazy age. And wow, what a time to be alive. And so we get to go from here. All right, so
what page is that?
We're on page we're at the bottom of, we're going to start at the bottom of page
165.
I was
160.
179. We're at
170.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Which is
What's
Anne
that?
referring to the book or to what, Steve, or to the
This is-
Kindle?
I've that's where we are in the book. It's page 50, 53 in the in the PDF file. But I've been kind of like watching where we are.
Yeah, it is. It's 170. Have it.
This
Yeah.
page marker is roughly page 180. So if you're open up Critical Path and you go to the bottom of page 179, that's the last paragraph, then it goes on to page 80. And I moved the last paragraph so we wouldn't have an interruption in the reading. And this is going to continue.
And at the bottom of the last paragraph of page 180.
At the
Okay,
bottom of
got it.
page
Thank you.
179 is the last paragraph before page 180.
Oh,
Just go. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, and so, John, if you don't mind.
Happy to read, yes. Okay, shall I start? Okay.
Right there at for 35 millimeter pictures.
Yep. Okay. The 35 millimeter pictures taken by the US Air Force at their lowest level of mosaicing, which would produce a 200-foot diameter sphere, were of such detail that you could, with the naked eye, identify your own home grounds and even your house, which would be a 1/100th of an inch speck, the smallest speck seeable by human eye. You would not be able to see your car in front of the house, nor could you see humans or cows, but you could see clearly your 400-acre or greater farm. The 200-foot size geoscope would make it possible for humans to identify the true scale of themselves and their activities on our planet. Humans could thus comprehend much more readily that their personal survival problems related intimately to all humanity's survival.
If I may say, this is describing the 200-foot ball inside of the 397-foot ball. And so instead of seeing U2, everybody'd stand underneath there and see this 200-foot geodesic globe over here. And that's what he's describing right here by using actual photographs from the US Air Force. And what's interesting, and that's what the U2 planes were doing. We're taking pictures back in the 60s and 70s. And if Bucky saw Google Earth right now, he'd be amazed. So go ahead, John.
But
This 200.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
I would think, and I'll suggest that we kind of lean onto those things. So the whole, I mean, the technical here and the sizes is one thing important. What is important in that phrase that say where you say human school does comprehend much more readily that the personal survival problem relates intimately to all humanity survival. It has to do with the one spaceship that we have.
Exactly.
All right. So if you're planning anything, know that there is pollution of your activity and try to the most that you can to incorporate it, at least to make provision to entertain it when it manifests. That's the biggest thing that I take from all of this reading.
You bet.
Yeah.
He's going into scales now, explaining that with these pictures from the US Air Force, 1/100th of an inch speck would be the small speck that would be able to be seen by the human eye. We'd be able to see, we wouldn't be able to see the car in front of our house, but we'd be able to see our house. And then he goes down and shows more scales of how we relate to each other here. And I don't think, you know what, I was going to finish this and I didn't, because when the PDF read these charts, let me take just, you can start reading there and I will do what I can to catch up.
This 200-foot size geoscope would make it possible for humans to identify the true scale of themselves and their activities on our planet. Humans could thus comprehend much more readily that their personal survival problems related intimately to all humanity's survival. The 200-foot geoscope surface geography would be at a scale of 1 to 200,000. At this scale, on a 200-foot diameter miniature Earth, we set the following approximate equivalencies. 1 foot equals 200,000 feet. 1 foot equals 38 miles. 1 inch equals 3 miles equals 15,000 feet. 3/4 of an inch equals 1,040 feet.
Yeah. And the rest of it's screwed up. But if we look in the book, it'll say 1/16th of an inch equals 1,040 feet. 1/18th of an inch equals 3 football fields. I don't know. I can't read it. It's kind of small. 1/16th of an inch equals the length of Queen Elizabeth II. 1/16th of an inch equals the length of the average oil tanker, and 1/64th of an inch will equal the edge of 1 acre.
I
So
can't
that's
see that. You're below the
I know,
screen.
that's what all this is because it goes off things. So we
Okay.
can start right here.
So what we're saying is trying to give us an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. That a 16th of an inch equals 3 football stadiums. Yep.
I read
Since
through
the
that.
size of the smallest line that can be seen separately from another line is 1/120th of an inch, the width of 2 lines equals, well, that's wrong. Yeah, okay, would be 1/60th of an inch. A 1/120th inch line enclosing a square of 1/64th of an inch would not have a visible interior area. So for this reason, an acre is shown on the 200-foot diameter geoscope would appear only as a square dot, 1/64th of an inch along its outer edge. An average home house would make a square speck of about 1/100th of an inch to the edge. Speaking approximately, the city of Greater Los Angeles would make a circle 1 1/2 feet in diameter on the 200-foot diameter.
Geoscope.
Yeah, just so a small town of 5,000 people would make a circle 1 inch in diameter. Looking at the 200-foot diameter geoscope from 1,000 feet away, you could say realistically to yourself, I can't see it from here, but my house is a seeable speck on that world. And putting powerful binoculars to your eyes, you could see that speck. The geoscope's electronic computers will store all relevant inventories of world data arranged chronologically in the order and spacing of discovery as they have occurred throughout all known history. Historical patterns, too slow for the human eye and mind to comprehend, such as the multi-millions of years to transpire changes in the geology of our planet, for instance, the picturing on the geoscope Earth in 2 minutes of the drifting apart of the continental plates, or in another 4-minute sequence picturing the last 4 1 million years each ice ages, spaced 25,000 years apart, their transforming of the world's ocean waters into ice cappings, which water shift reveals peninsulas interconnecting what we now know only as islands, for instance, the Malay Peninsula, including all of Java, Sumatra, Borneo, Bali, Sulawesi, and the Philippines, as it did in the last ice age. The geographically varying population growths of our Earth could be run off on the geoscope at a rate of 1 second per century. This would show humanity first appearing on the coral atolls in the waters of Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean, then coming up on the lands of China and India and East Africa and spreading westward into Europe and then westward to the Americas with a small second magnitude migration, rafting on the Japan current and flowing the other way. Another change to be illustrated is resource transpositioning, such as the shift in geographical location of the world's iron metal from mines of yesterday, much of which is now converted into world-around city buildings, railway tracks, and bridges, all of which latter were scrapped when the buildings or railways became obsolete. Yesterday's buildings and equipment have now become our highest grade iron mines. The data covering such epoch shifts may be comprehensively introduced into the computer memory bank and acceleratingly displayed around the interior or exterior surface of the geoscope Earth to be comprehended by any human of sound, brain, and mind. The 200-foot geoscope could present the cloud cover and weather history for all the known weather histories as recorded by ship captains around the world and in the recent century by world-around weather stations. At Boulder, Colorado, the United States Meteorological Service has a large computer-equipped headquarters. They have 2 large world maps on the walls of the main lobby of their building. The first world map has displayed on it all the weather data just received seconds ago from stations all around the world. Throughout all the last 30 Cold Warring years, there's been no breakdown in the integrity of the hourly interweather reporting amongst all the nations around the world. On the other identically sized and coloured world map is shown the predicted world weather map emanating from the large computers into which has been fed all the known weather data from each of the world-around weather stations for each year and day of the year for all the known years of weather record keeping. Out of that ever-increasing data, the computers figure the most probable weather conditions for each locality for each minute of the day for each day of the year. The computer map is becoming ever more identical to the actual world weather map. This meteorological headquarters of the USA at Boulder, Colorado, sits high on the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains, with Denver and the Great Plains stretched out far below. Walter Orr Roberts took moving picture footage of the vast area stretched out below Boulder. He had his moving picture camera take 1 picture per minute. There were all kinds of clouds in the sky down below Boulder. Much of the time you could see clearly between the clouds, at which time you could see the whole city of Denver with vast open land around it. He took such 1 minute apart sequences for many years. Then his
I moved it up.
Many hours, after many hours.
was on kinds of clouds. Much of the time you could see clearly. Okay, yes. He took such 1 minute apart pictures for many hours. He then projected the moving picture at the conventional 24 frames per second rate and was astonished to see the cloud formation acting exactly like ocean waves, rolling across the scene with cresting, breaking waves, having deep intervening troughs through which you could see the wave bottoms on which Denver sat. It is very probable that the world history of weather for 200 years, shown at high speed acceleration on the geoscope, might display very great regularities of season changing, with possible regularities of multi-year periods between dry and wet weather, etc. The world history of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions could be shown on the 200-foot geoscope, and if the world around picturing is accelerated to contract time in important degree, it might readily disclose rhythms that would visually predict the coming quakes and eruptions.
Let's pause just there for a second, because at the time when Bucky wrote this, like this was so visionary, right? But now we're so used to seeing satellite pictures of the Earth and weather patterns. There,
Mhm.
we're looking backwards, going, "Oh, well, that's that's no big deal." But at the time this was written, this was provocative, and there's something that we haven't yet done, and that's the invitation of Bucky to take a look at weather patterns over years to see what reoccurring weather occurs. So we could be all this climate change stuff. If we could get our data together, we might see it as a regular current, just like a tide moving in and moving out. Instead of getting all hysterical about what's going on right now, we get it in context. And that's the beautiful invitation of Bucky's writing here. Now he gets into earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and he says we might even experience cycles in these things. It would disclose rhythms that would help us predict earthquakes.
But
George,
what is
Finding nature's patterns.
yeah,
but what is he doing in principle, Steve? It's showing the power of scaling, that is boundary, extending the boundary with instrumentation and precision, and then the cycles and patterns. Because he says that the modeling that you see from Helioscope he first started with scaling. We observe scaling at the level of the ocean. We can also go higher, outer atmosphere, and then you observe the same scaling. But then the scale of what you can see is going to be different. But the importance here is that you can start discovering the rhythm of things, the pattern of things that John says, within the same model. You can start seeing that. And maybe, you could start predict forecast what will happen. Because for now, we don't see far at this moment. We don't see very far. I even went to say that in the scaling, if you can't see the whole thing, it is, you can start framing to make a movie. The movie will be shown in such a way that people become conscious of, for example, centuries or eons flowing. I don't know, but the principle is that scaling can allow us to detect, say, outer patterns that can help us to kind of forecast, event to happen. And thus, you can forecast them, you can position your angle of veering in a way that they become less, our reaction to them become less hysterical than it is today.
You make such an amazingly good point here, because by seeing the complete cycle of weather over 100 years, then you start getting a little bit predictive because you focus on the pattern instead of on the daily weather. You're not worried about an umbrella. What would happen, because we're on Wednesdays now, we're talking about self-organizing and we're talking about systems. And what would happen if we took a city and showed it over a 150-year time and showed it building up as a city and then showed the suburbs expanding out and then see the city deteriorate? So we could see that, okay, yeah, these suburbs we live in are wonderful, but what's it doing to the city? And because we don't see the cycle, because we don't see the trend, because we don't see the system in context, we just say, well, I'm going to build this fourplex and create some housing out here. We're going to gentrify this up, and we're not looking at the whole system.
Yeah.
And what Bucky's point is saying here, hey, there's a system out there. Get in touch with it. Yeah.
And the whole recycling of things.
Yeah.
Because Bucky is big into recycling. The materials are always in circulation, right?
Right.
if not in the forms of today, but in the components of those forms.
In our last
So
chapter we've read, he went through a whole thing and talked about how buildings could be recycled and reused. Whenever he designed something, he kept that recycling in mind. Perfect.
okay,
Okay, cool. Any other comments or anything, other comments on it? You know, I want to say one more thing. Jordan Peterson, one of his big things is that one of the reasons why society is so sick today is because we don't see ourselves as ourselves in time. We don't see ourselves as kids. We don't see ourselves now, and we don't imagine ourselves in the future. We're making decisions for right now. We're not making long-term, systematic, progressive, in the sense of processive decisions. We're just making decisions out of context. And that's what he's bringing up here. This is a very powerful invitation here.
you call it the topology of ourselves, right, Steve?
A topology of what?
Ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, imagine yourself from the fetus through your life to what you are today and what you'll be.
Right.
Okay, we're mortals. So if you've seen your life that wise, then you can shape it. Because a shape is between the initial and the end of that topology. So we're shaping that, we're shaping our lives. Our lives are shaping themselves from childhood, adulthood, third, fourth age, and all of this. That's what will be remembered of us as individuals, isn't it?
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay, any further conversation?
No, let's
continue to read, John, if you don't mind.
Certainly. Now,
since
I
the
don't think we'd
military.
read that. Where was the last few words we'd read just ahead of what is on display, is it?
Yeah, that's where you start since. You have to start at since the military.
Now, did we read that would visually predict the coming quakes and eruptions? I don't remember reading that, but anyway, that's all right. Since the military intelligence of each of the world's military powers keeps careful track of their respective enemies' disposition of their armaments, troops, and navies, such strategic matters are not secret to the military of both sides and are only unknown to the world people. The 200-foot geoscope installed outside the UN might display all that is known of those military dispositions around the Earth. All humanity would be able to see where all the world's submarines are located. This might greatly alter the dependency of people upon their political leaders and tend to induce an active democratic participation in world affairs. The UN delegates would obviously be greatly aided and stimulated by the 200-foot geoscope disclosures to be viewed through all their east-facing windows. Around the world, evolutionary changes in transportation means quantity, average miles per year, etc., the number of people engaged in world travel and their average distancing, their convergencies in cities and deployments to remote places, would all be intimately displayed on an accelerated rate of disclosure around the world. The present real-time disposition of all aircraft operating around the world would be displayed, as well as their departure points and destinations. The accelerated pattern of world movement of the population from farms and cities would be dramatic.
Wow. What a visionary.
The geoscope.
Yeah, but that will not happen. Remember, he wrote The Grunge of Giant after this one.
The geoscope juxtaposition and overlaying of seemingly unrelated information may produce unexpected and otherwise unimaginable pictures quickly and synergetically. One of the most fantastic capabilities of the human brain is that of complex pattern recognition. If world-encompassing actions were accelerated, or a facsimile of the action presented within the velocity range of human comprehension, not only would the motion become clearly visible, but also some fundamental principles or heretofore unfamiliar forms of behaviour probably would be exposed. The brain quickly correlates such new information with previously acquired data and insight gained from other experiences and adds understanding to the new phenomenon being examined. Many of today's seemingly complete, new and complex occurrences are in fact relatively simple and are clearly related to other phenomena with which we have learned to deal successfully. With the geoscope, humanity would be able to recognise formerly invisible patterns and thereby to forecast and plan in vastly greater magnitude than heretofore. The consequences of various world plans could be computed and projected using the accumulated history-long inventory of economic, demographic and sociologic data. All the world data would be dynamically viewable and picturable and relayable by radio to all the world, so that common consideration in a most educated manner of all world problems by all world people would become a practical everyday hour and minute event. From our usual local, only tangentially viewed horizon to horizon observations, within which we see such a small fraction of the Earth that it seems to be horizontal, we conclude that in order to be a sphere, the Earth must indeed be very, very large. Other lands and other peoples seem very remote and strange.
Are we
Our
good?
other lands and other people seem to be very remote and strange. The interrelationship between their activities and ours is difficult to comprehend. When one realises, on the other hand, that we are all, in fact, on the surface of a very tiny spherical spaceship on a long and seemingly inexplicably purposed journey, our proximity to each other becomes clear and the absurdity of many of our conflicts becomes evident. For the first time in all human history, humanity's function as local universe information gatherer and local universe problem solver will be a practical reality, using the whole of the Earth's comprehensive resources and data and incisive computer-augmented problem-solving capabilities with all humanity's spontaneous democratic participation, allowing humankind to use its intellect to the fullest in attempting to make our evidence successful. So in order to, that's the lawyer in me, attempting to make our existence successful. The proposed UN East River Blackwell's Ledge installation of the 200-foot geoscope was brought to the attention of U Thant when he was the Secretary General of the United States. It appealed to him so much that he gave a luncheon at New York's City Pier for me and all the ambassadors to the UN from around the earth. It was well attended with more than half of the world's permanent ambassadors to the UN present. He had me give a thorough presentation speech describing the 200-footer. It met with great favour. Thereafter, on a number of prominent occasions, U Thant represented the concept. The estimated cost at that time was 10 million. Inflation would make it about 50 million today. There was no visible source of funding. The UN itself did not have any funds for such a purpose. The development of the popularity of World Game and the increasing need for the 200-foot geoscope might suggest that its realisation may not be far off. The geoscope will make possible communication of evolutionary phenomena not hitherto comprehendingly communicable by humans' conceptual faculties regarding their spaceship Earth's orientation and course of travel amongst the other planets around the Sun, as well as the comprehensive evolutionary developments occurring around the surface of our spaceship Earth, as already described. Many events about to take place will be dramatically evidenced, as will the avoidability of many events which, if anticipated by humans, would tend to destroy us all, and on the other hand, if reliably anticipated, will make possible safe and happy continuance. It is logical to consider at this point the continuingly important part played by the historically significant omni-world-around electromagnetically triangulated, aerial photo mapped, latitude, longitude coordinated geographical data, the triangular gridding of whose great sphere serves as the spherical scoreboard upon which to display the Geoscope's World Game software.
Whoops. Went too
Sorry,
far.
I forgot to come to the table with a bottle of water. I'm just asking my lovely wife if she'll bring me some water. I'm getting dry.
Yeah, well, we appreciate your reading, and if you want to trade off, we can do that.
No, that's okay. I'll have some water in a sec. Yeah, I know. I normally bring a bottle, but I forgot today.
Well, I'm just getting overwhelmed with this idea of seeing things in 4 dimensions. That's what's coming up for me. In other words, seeing, instead of looking at the weather today or the weather this week, look at the weather for the last 100 years. By being in that 4th dimension of time and seeing it measured right in front of me, it would collapse all of my individuated, out of context judgments about reality. And I would start seeing things as a whole rather than just a phenomenon. You know, I'd see the system instead of the phenomenon. I think it's very powerful. I'm getting overwhelmed with the concept or idea. When you're ready to go, John,
Yeah, sure.
you can go.
In 1900, 3 years before the aeroplane, 9 years before the discovery of the North Pole, 11 years before the discovery of the South Pole, and 35 years before radar. Interesting how you create such a context.
Yeah.
The world around geographical information had multiplied to such an extent that the major governments of the earth agreed to have their geographers hold an omni-world meeting to adopt universal standards of cartography and geography. The world's cartographers agreed to adopt a 1,000,000 to 1 scale of producing their master world maps. At the same meeting of world geographers and cartographers, it was noted by many of those professionals that the rectilinear latitude-longitude geographical coordinate systems, angular direction and linearly measured distances method of surveying of the world, at that time in universal use, had permitted much large-scale error to creep in. It was proving less and less satisfactory to go on trying to square the spherical surface of the Earth. Spherical trigonometry, for instance, showed that a spherical cubing of the Earth produced 8 120-degree corners of that globe, and not 90 degrees as it was popularly misconceived to be doing. Most of the positioning of the geographical data had been done by explorers, often without the use of sextants and only from their estimates, as recorded in journals. For instance, leaving the confluence of rivers X and Y, I travelled northwest for 8 hours when I came upon a lake about a mile long. The explorer then made a drawing of these relationships from his pocket compass observations, pocket watch, and observations from high points of the direction of other high points and viewable features. As a consequence, the US Navy, the US Hydrographic Survey, and the US Geological Survey Services determined to inaugurate a triangular surveying of the Earth's surface, starting at a point in North America whose position was obtained and frequently verified by celestial observation and spherical trigonometry. At the time, the US Navy had an astronomically fixed, triangularly surveyed and measured off, meticulously buoy-marked and multi-land points observed official nautical mile just eastward of Owl's Head Lighthouse in the protected deep waters of Penobscot Bay in the state of Maine. Over this official mile, all the ships built for the Navy had to be repeatedly run in reverse directions, with and against the tide, with and against the wind, etc., to prove that they could maintain the top speed called for in their builders' contracts with the US government. In that same Penobscot Bay, there was one most conveniently sightable, uninhabited small island near the Navy's measured mile. On this island, named Compass Island, the USA surveyors built a high wooden pyramid, whose apex position they carefully calculated by many times repeated sextant observations of the sun and major stars. Other wooden monumented geographical points on other islands in Penobscot Bay were sharply located by their intertriangular relationships with Compass Island. This complex of intertriangulated islands became the base grid from which the US continental intertriangulation grew. By the time of World War II's commencement, most of the United States latitude-longitude mapping had been triangularly corrected and its geographical features accurately repositioned on government maps. Churchill's grand strategy of coping with the Nazi Germans and Italians' occupancy of all Europe except the British Isles was to open the offensive against them from North Africa. This was called the soft underbelly attack. World War II introduced also the radio triangulation concept of bombing flights, navigational courses, and bomb drop points, which thus could be accomplished from above cloud cover. Such radar control was strictly dependent, and whatever ground mapping accuracy existed, on the prior to radio triangulated plotted maps. Franklin Roosevelt's grand strategy agreement with Churchill called for the USA's swift extension of its radio triangulation surveying from the already radio triangulated USA southward into Mexico, and thence into Central America, into South America, thence from Brazil's easternmost capes to Ascension Island in the South Atlantic, and by triangulation of the latter with South America's other Atlantic islands to North Africa, and thence to North Africa positions opposite Italy on the south shores of the Mediterranean. From their scientifically known North African geographical points, the first US bombing flight was carried out on Sicily, the flight's course being only hopefully coordinated with the first US landing of its troops on Sicily. Because the geographical location of Sicily had never been radio triangulated and coordinated with the latitude-longitude grid, the USA bombing had to rely on the non-triangulated verified old latitude-longitude charts. The whereabouts of Sicily was so far off the triangularly radio-coordinated grid that the US Air Force bombs let go above the clouds inadvertently landed in the midst of much of its own USA troops. With Sicily finally occupied, the world triangulated grid was extended reliably all the way from the USA into successively radio-corrected mapping areas of Italy as the USA forces worked slowly northward. Positioning errors in the old world mapping as great as 15 or 20 miles were often discovered and corrected. After the USA's successful military penetration northward in Italy and the Normandy landing in France, the intercontinental radio triangulation became established all the way from the USA through Central America, South America, across the Atlantic into North Africa and thence into Italy, and was extended throughout all France as the military penetration of the Allies prevailed. Finally, the world triangulation entered Germany and came to Berlin. The USA reached Berlin after Russia had already taken the portion of Germany in which Berlin was located. By agreement of their general staffs, the Russians and USA allies entered Berlin almost simultaneously. The USA intelligence operatives rushed to seize as much as possible of the Germans' aerial photo-coordinated radio triangulated flight maps over Russia, hoping that this triangulation might have been carried deeply into Russia by the Germans. Apparently, the Germans had not carried their radio triangulated photo position corrections deeply into Russia, or the Russians had found and removed the data before the USA got there, for none was found by the USA or its allies. Though at the time the USSR and USA were ostensibly allied, their behind-the-scenes transnational socialist and transnational free enterprising interests were powerfully at work, each making one-sided strategically anticipatory moves. As a result of all the foregoing, the Russians had all the long ago published omni-triangularly corrected geographical data of America, while the USA had no such data of Russia geographical corrections, which with errors as great as 20 miles in the latitude-longitude positioning of Russia's cities and other strategic points, meant that with the post-World War II inception of intercontinental atomic bomb warfare, the Russians knew and as yet know exactly where all the USA targets are, but the USA did not know where Russian targets were. not within any strategically effective limits. To confuse the USA even more, the USSR built mock towns and cities at the incorrectly mapped points and put radio broadcasting stations where their cities were supposed to be but weren't, as mispublished only by the pre-triangulated gridding of the USSR.
Wow.
Oh, shit.
Can we just stop there a little bit?
That's amazing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Manu.
I just seen that this Susan's, type 1 and type 2 evolution just come to play.
Yeah.
So, you have the spherical triangulation, right? That gives precise positioning of some of the places, and that allow accurate. And then accurate mapping of areas and of the world. But while we at that time, as that is being done, there's also powerful, US, for example, you talk about here things. The US and Russia and Russia were allies during the Second World War, right?
Yeah, kind of tentatively, yeah.
No, they were allies. They were, the US.
They were officially allies, but they never
Allies
trusted.
officially, but very.
Yeah.
very
No, hold on. But that's where the nuance is. They were allies officially, but the interest in the back, the grunge, or what you call the military-industrial complex in the West, and whatever group that was in the socialist camp, they wanted to exploit those those discoveries and those things to their own interest, isn't it?
Yeah.
Manu, watch a movie called Red Joan.
Red Zone?
Red Joan, Joan.
Ah.
Yeah.
She was a British scientist who became a spy for the Russians during the Second World War and had access to the innermost nuclear secrets of the Americans and the British, and for years fed information to the Russians. And the movie is brilliant because it starts with her arrest as an elderly woman when they finally discovered what she'd been doing for, 50, 60 years. But it's very interesting, and it shows the thinking of young people, the intelligentsia, the students at Oxford and Cambridge, how many of them were vulnerable to the Russians, how they were sold philosophically on socialism, and that point was used to seduce them. Look, we're allies. The Soviets and the English and the Americans are allies. Why should they be keeping all this critical information from us? Right? And in fact, I won't spoil the movie because it's a brilliantly portrayed, very interesting movie which portrays this very point of the degree to which the Allies and the Soviet were allies during the Second World War and what it really meant.
Yeah, but
Red Joan.
Red Joan, I noticed, John. But an idea here. So it's so difficult.
Yeah.
To have somebody who think, let's just put it at the level of Bucky. Remember, okay, Bucky was never accused of being a spy. Because even during, the height of the Cold War,
McCarthy
yes, he was collaborating very well with Russian scientists. So what I mean here is that on both sides, let us not be trapped by the thought of the military-industrial complex or of any other powerful organization on the other side that is pulling the string for their interest. But it's so difficult to exercise individual independence of thought today when the powers that will tempt us or do things are so powerful, yes. Because back in the 60s, travel regularly to Russia. He collaborated with a lot of guys, and there were on that side also guys that collaborated, you know, in a way that was sincere. But the whole stuff, you should put that in contrast with what Bucky said, that you build a geoscope in front of the UN that reveal all the military secret position, all the arsenal, or whichever power that is on this earth. That was never going to happen. Right? Because it was captured before. And it is interesting that these things are happening even today. So, you know, what is presented as the front of ideas that appear to be what it is at stake is not. There's a lot more at stake, but that is hidden.
Yeah. I love the fact that Bucky points out that the Russians built cities where the incorrect maps said they would, and even established broadcast radio stations. And so to make it look like there was life going on there. So if the US wanted to attack, they'd attack this ghost city because it happened to be on a map that was incorrect.
Also, it distorted and threw off all US positioning because their maps were then inaccurate.
Your maps were inaccurate. Who would ever thought?
No.
Absolutely amazing. And John, I did some research here in the background, and here's the picture. Here's the red Joan. And here's where it's on Amazon Prime right now, it looks like. It's on Roku and YouTube Prime. Free as well. So that's kind of interesting. And then I went to, I think I checked this out here. No, that wasn't it.
And Judi Dench plays an amazing part.
Oh my, she's always just the best, right?
Yeah.
And then I clicked on a little thing and came to the actual, there it is on Amazon Prime. So Judi Dench is a suburban widow concealing a double life as a Soviet spy.
It's a true story.
Yeah. How cool. Judi Dench is an amazing actress, and that's a wonderful thing. Wow, John, thanks for sharing that. What I noticed is that I didn't get back to the Word document, and so now we're going to cope with this PDF file, and we're going to see if we can get through it from here, and then I'll update the Word document later. It's hard Word document is to go through. This PDF file is a pain. Let's proceed though.
Since the communist and capitalist worlds were organizing themselves for Armageddon and were committed to intercontinental atomic bombing, the exact location of targets was of highest importance. What the world public did not know, and what both the USSR and USA military leaders did know, was that the USA had no radio-corrected triangulation map of the USSR, and that the USSR did have radio-corrected triangulation maps of the USA, as well triangulation all the USA's allies. Russia knew exactly where the USA is, and the USA may not as yet know where much of the USSR is. It was this fact that caused the USSR to resist any inspection of atomic bomb manufacturing agreements or any other ground-level inspection by the USA, as regularly demanded by the USA and its allies whenever strategic inter-USSR and USA negotiated agreements were attempted. It probably was the USA attempted cross-triangulation operation conducted from the Iran-Afghanistan border, whose operation was curtailed with termination of Shahist Iran. It was the CIA's transfer of its electronic surveillance into other Afghanistan territory that gave the USSR a valid cause for militarily entering Afghanistan, which the Russians have long wanted to do in order eventually to reach through to the Indian Ocean. Anticipating the ultimate development of a valid cause for moving into Afghanistan, the Russians had already made the Afghans a present of modern high tonnage carrying highway system for Russia into Kabul. The military policy of the USA, deceiving its own public, first became manifest during World War II, when the USA repeatedly denied in the press and radio that a USA Navy ship had been sunk by the enemy, though it had been so proclaimed by the enemy's broadcasting. Long after the facts, the USA would publish the losses in a low-key manner. The adoption of the policy of self-deception was never announced by the USA, but it was assumed tacitly to have been instituted to bolster USA morale. That the USA fighting forces and their supporting public were assumed by the USA leaders to be so stupid as not to realise what was happening, when time after time it was learned only days later the ships were indeed sunk, was the beginning of the end of the USA populist credit for the operational integrity of its representative government. Yeah, true. You learn you can't trust your governments. For several years, I was a member of the Dartmouth Conference. This was an arrangement made by Norman Cousins and 2 other Americans with the Russian Academy of Sciences to produce teams of USSR and USA leaders in various fields, teams of approximately 25 on each side, to meet in such years as deemed expedient, first in the USA at Dartmouth College, next at Moscow and Leningrad, next at the Westchester Country Club in New York, etc. I was a member of the Moscow, Leningrad and Westchester, New York conferences. The conferees discussed every known point of contention existing between the 2 countries. The USA team on which I served consisted of John Kenneth Galbraith, Harvard economist, Paul Dudley White, Eisenhower's cardiologist, Norton Simon, financier, Leslie Paffrath, the director of the Johnson Foundation, 2 Harvard USSR specializing professors, a US Navy admiral and a US Army general. The latter 4 had been on many USSR, USA Arms problem negotiating teams. The balance of the USA team consisted of Norman Cousins, team leader, Dr. Franklin Murphy, the Chancellor of UCLA, now chairman of the board of the Los Angeles Times Mirror Corporation, David Rockefeller, and myself. The Russian team included the president of their Academy of Sciences, their leading astronomer, who was in charge of their space vehicle guidance, their leading climatologist, others of their leading scientists, their most eminent writers, philosophers, economists, an admiral, a general, 30 in all. Present also were a dozen simultaneous interpreters loaned by the UN. We all lived in the same hotel. The dining room had only 4 place tables. As you entered, you chose quickly with which of the Russians you wished to sit. They were the first to reach the dining room. You tried to sit successively with each of the USSR team members. The moment you sat down with a Russian, an interpreter moved in with you. To our USA surprise, it turned out at the conference that all the Russians could speak English, while amongst the USA representatives, only the 2 Harvard professors could speak Russians. The interpreters were obviously Soviet spies. Our meetings consisted of, you've taken a bit with you, I think, a little bit more at the top
I
of the page.
apologize. This is not, between my computer and the PDF, it's an issue.
Yeah, there it is. Stop. Our meetings consisted of A, those lasting all day, every day, at which all the officially to be considered points were discussed, and B, the very small individual dining room and other casual meetings at dinner parties and receptions. At the latter, it seemed as though all points of contention could be coped with in a manner satisfactory to both sides. At the formal all-day meetings, however, everyone seemed so intractable that nothing could be resolved. For the last day of the first week-long conferences, some in Moscow, some in Leningrad, it was decided by the leaders of the 2 teams that instead of having summaries prepared of what had occurred, each side would select one of its members to give a speculative half-day-long prognostication regarding all prominent features of human life on planet Earth for the next half-century. Each prognosticator would have half a day in which to make his or her presentation. It was assumed that the prognosticators would indicate how much each side was accommodating the other side's conference issues. These presentations were expected to provide a clue as to what extent the respective sides would be yielding. Need a little bit more at the bottom of the page. Thanks, Steve.
Really?
Yeah, in the future to the opposing arguments presented during the previous formal sessions.
Sorry.
The Russians chose their leading meteorologist to give the USSR prognostication. He would have all of Saturday morning to present it. I was chosen to present the USA prognostication. I had all Saturday afternoon to do so. In preparation, I made a tensegrity sphere to demonstrate new human use potentials of nature's fundamental structuring principles of discontinuous comprehension and continuous tension as employed in all geodesics and synergetics. I also calculated the weight of a great cathedral we passed each day on the walk to the Grand Palace in which we held our conferences. Employing tensegrity principles, I was able to show a 99% weight reduction for enclosing an equal amount of clear span to that of the cathedral, including adequately engineered snow loading, wind loading, and earthquake proofing. I based my presentation on the 20th century's unprecedented invisible revolution in chemistry, electronics, and metallurgy, by means of which we could now do so much more with so much less weight, volume, energy, and time per each accomplished function as to suggest that we humans would soon prove invalid Malthus's seemingly infallible scientific conclusion that economically on our planet Earth, it had to be only you or me, not enough for both. I then outlined the changes in patterning of life on Earth if there were ample high standard of living life support for all. My discourse, its predictions, and the raison d'etre for these predictions were approximately the same as those of this book, Critical Path. What I said pleased both the USA and the USSR delegates. On the walk home to our hotel, each individual delegate from both sides hustled up beside me and told me excitedly how pleased he or she was over my statements. The Russians were unanimously enthusiastic about what I said. Fortunately, all the USA delegates seemed equally pleased. At the farewell banquet that night, the president of the USSR Academy of Sciences said in his closing speech, "From now on, Buckminster Fuller will be ranked in the USSR side by side with Franklin and Edison." I assumed that the Russians had so classified me because I was not only an inventor, but dwelt in the lands of capitalism, despite the fact that I am apolitical and an ardent advocate of an omni-humanity advantaging freedom of individual initiative and not of private enterprises only selfishly benefited freedoms. In our second meeting 2 years later at the Westchester Country Club, many of the American participants lived nearby and so went home each night. Together with the Johnson Foundation director, I lived at the club with the Russians. I found that the young editor of Pravda was the only Russian among them who seemed free to explore and discuss spontaneously the world's future prospects. Though obviously a faithful communist, his speculative thoughts seemed not to be bound within popularly established party line dogma. What I learned from the Russians, regarding which I am certain they were seriously convinced, was that the USSR would never be willing to negotiate with the USA regarding any world-around supreme power matters when the USSR was in a weaker military position than the USA. They said to me, every time we struggle to attain parity with the USA so that we can negotiate, the USA initiates an arms advancement before the meeting, wherefore we are deprived of tolerable negotiating conditions. Worse than that, they said, this continually defeats turning our massive high technology productivity towards realising a lifestyle for our socialistic economy equal to or better than that already enjoyed by capitalism, whose world publicised high standard of living is a thorn in our side as we remain unable to do so, not because of technical or social inability, but because of the preoccupation of technological resources within the Cold Warring. Assuming that an atomic war would mean that both sides would lose, ergo it would not occur, the USSR determined to outnumber and thus overpower the USA in the design and production of conventional air and sea armaments and in the training and maintenance of a vastly greater standing army, whereby they felt they could negotiate constructively for the establishment and the maintenance of peaceful world-around conditions. It must be remembered that in their 1920s formulated successive multi-staged 5-year industrial planning, the Russians had assumed a World War II to occur in the early 1940s, at which time it would be evident to the private enterprise world that socialism could be successful, which private enterprise had always said would be impossible. Ergo, the private enterprise-dominated countries would start a war to destroy socialism, but would do it in a highly deceptive manner. Google Prime is in my way. highly deceptive manner by having a Nazi propaganda offensive launched against the German industrial cartels, which would suddenly be turned against the USSR. This is exactly what happened. The Germans first made the USSR their ally. When well into Poland and at the Russian border, the Nazis turned treacherously against the USSR. The anti-USSR strategy of the Cliveden set miscarried when, soon thereafter, the USSR and the USA became allies. No one in the USA can understand the bitterness as yet existent in the USSR over the millions of USSR troops and civilians killed by the Nazis. The USSR could not understand the USA rearming of the Germans, with whom the USSR was much more concerned as a World War IV enemy than with the USA as such an enemy. The Russians had assumed in their 5-year planning that when World War II terminated, they would be able to devote all their high industrial productivity to advancing all their people to prove that socialism could produce an economically desirable lifestyle equivalent to, or better than that, provided by capitalism. Again, the Russian planning became thwarted when Western capitalism, which had been socialised by FDR's New Deal, realised at the cessation of World War II that it could not carry on without the vast government procurement system, which is occasioned only by war. To cope with the situation, the capitalists invented World War III, which they called the Cold War. The Russians queried of the US, their supposed ally, "Who are you going to fight?" And the USA answered, "You." This meant that the USSR would have to focus all its high science and technology productivity on producing armaments for decades of around the world Cold Warring, in the conduct of which both the Russians and the USA would have to avoid direct all-out interconfrontation. With the joining of superpowers' war by direct military confrontation, neither side could withdraw without an all-out surrender. However, all-out intercontinental atomic war would mean the end of human life on Earth. Therefore, the USA and the USSR, in testing their respective strengths, would have to operate indirectly against one another through their respective puppet nations, hopefully intent on drawing forth the secret weapons in the other's arsenals. Thus, we have the North versus the South Koreans, the Vietnamese versus the Viet Cong, the Israelis versus the Arabs, etc. The Russians decided early on that atomic warheads would not be used because the rocket delivery times travelling at 14,000 miles per hour were such that with radar travelling at 700,000 miles per hour, both sides would know 10 minutes before being struck that the enemy had fired their atomic warheads. Ergo, both sides would have plenty of time to send off all their atomic warheads and both sides would lose. So while deceptively continuing the atomic warhead race with the USA, the USSR committed itself realistically to producing the strongest navy in history. The USA politicians kept the USA populace feeling militarily secure because they could point out that the USA was developing far more atomic warheads than the USSR. The USA was doing so because big oil money, which successfully lobbied Washington's Capitol Hill energy policies, knowing that petroleum would ultimately be exhausted, fostered atomic warhead production in order to build up the atomic technology industry, in the development which the US government had spent over $200 billion, and its nuclear scientific personnel, whom they, the World Power Structure Organizations, would need to employ in operating the atomic energy plants and the electrical distribution networks as world petroleum supplies dwindle. They would need the energy meters in order to continue exploiting the capitalist world's energy needs. When Jane's...
Oops, sorry, hang on. That's the trouble with this. I never know when I quite hit the bottom.
Okay, here it is. When Jane's annual world inventory of ships showed that the USSR had reached parity with the USA, the US politicians laughed it off by saying the Russians did not even have aircraft carriers. This was true because the USSR had seen that aircraft.
Oh, geez.
The
Aircraft carriers.
there's a little, there it is. I know what the problem was. Okay. Are highly vulnerable. Aircraft carriers are highly vulnerable. So they built huge aeroplane carrying submarines from which a plane could take off by VTOL, vertical flight to height, followed by horizontal flight, ergo needing no runaways. The VTOL from submarine launching was strongly advocated by some of the US Navy's most astute officers, whose word was not heeded because the aircraft carriers were much more profitable business for private enterprise. The weapons industry's Washington lobbyists were more persuasive than the US Navy's experts. With its naval fleet supremacy established, but lacking en route support bases, the USSR then set about to develop disarmament talks with the USA from a superior conventional war power position, that of controlling the high seas lines of supply. Realising that the USA senators had jurisdiction over all peace negotiating, and the USA Senate's Republican membership was intent to deprive the Democratic president of peacemaking success, and that apparently the USA was not going to go along with ratification of the SALT Treaty, the Russians decided to put the heat on the USA so that a global naval line of supply confrontation incident, such as the occupation of Afghanistan, would demonstrate, as it has in Iran, that the USA can no longer control the Indian Ocean and Arabian Sea and therefore cannot take...
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
See, I need to know some key words here. Control is too general of a word. I'm sure of it. Yeah, searching. There are 506. About where were we, guys? Maybe we're just right up in front of chapter 6 here. Let me see. Earthian billions, moon landing.
We're back before that.
Technical artifacts.
No. Before that.
It was before, be with Afghanistan.
Hang on, yeah.
Afghanistan.
A little bit before, yes.
A little
Before
bit
this.
before. Page up.
We're in the Ghanaians now. We weren't there.
Wow. I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
This is all world game discussion. Oh, I see. Page
Yeah.
up. I went the wrong direction.
That's all right. No wonder it was
Okay,
on
here
you.
we go. We haven't read that. Here we go. The Afghans.
Yeah. Before this.
We haven't read about Kabul yet.
What are you looking for, Steve?
Where we were. Somehow I got off on the page.
We were just before the 3 dots. Yes. So just the paragraph on top there. Yeah, you know.
Well, 3 dots.
Just scroll down. Yeah. Indian Ocean and
Yeah, that's
Arabian Sea. Yes. That's where we were.
Yeah. Here we are. Here it is.
Yes.
Apparently, the USA was not going to go along with ratification of the SALT Treaty. The Russians decided to put the heat on the USA so that a global naval line of supply confrontation incident, such as the occupation of Afghanistan, would demonstrate, as it has in Iran, that the USA can no longer control the Indian Ocean and Arabian Sea and therefore cannot take yesteryear's shorter-wind military steps against Iran. The USA's half-century dominance of world affairs is now terminating, just as did Great Britain's century and a third of dominance come to an end with the 1929 economic crash. Sir Halford Mackinder was Britain's chief geographical advisor for the latter Victorian period to 1930. Mackinder pointed out that the British Empire was built on its mastery of the world's ocean routes from the Orient to Europe. He also pointed out to the British in about 1900 that what the world's seacoasts might really be was not what one saw when looking at the world maps. He showed the British that the railways with a large tonnage capacity, previously seagoing cargo carriers going up onto the land. He further showed them that the Trans-Siberian Railway was being built by the Russians to short-circuit the Orient to Europe high-tonnage cargo routes. Mackinder pointed out that the Trans-Siberian Railway was strategically too far to the north. Its snow impediment was too great to be economical. The British kept the Russians bottled up by refusing them an Atlantic port. Russia had to go to Archangel in the Arctic Sea and on the Pacific coast of Vladivostok. The Orient Express ran only from Paris to Constantinople and into Asia Minor. The Tsar-backing Russian power structure interests, hoping to compete with the British, represented the inheritors of the before the water route.
Hang on. See, my stupid, it's frozen. Let me think here. Okay, we're on page, oh, good, that worked. Maybe it'll work now. Yeah, here we go. No, it's
Yep.
stuck. Page down. It's stuck. So we're going to go, we're going to come back and find was Britain's chief. I'm really sorry, but here's what we got to do. I got to close this down because the engine's screwed up.
Right.
And we're going to go back here and reopen it.
Right.
And then once it gets reopened, I'll do a search for that string and we'll be back on target. I hate to use political military language. I'm asking it to do too many things at once. There we go. Okay, good. Now we'll get a little bit bigger. Whoop, a little bit too big. Okay.
Yes, Frank.
Okay. Bit smaller. Yeah.
No, that's too big now.
Yeah, a bit smaller, a little bit smaller. Oh, okay. We can read that. As long as we can move, we can read it.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Vladivostok.
Okay.
After
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Where are we? We're down here. in Vladivostok?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, Vladivostok. That was it.
Okay. Hang on.
The Orient Express, yes, that's right. We started reading that.
Hang on a second.
Here it is.
What's that
Okay.
thing is-
Stop. Stop. Up a little bit.
There we go. The Orient Express
The
ran.
Express ran only from Paris to Constantinople in Asia Minor. The Tsar-backing Russian power structure interests, hoping to compete with the British, represented the inheritors of the before the water route.
Overland.
And caravanning powers of the old world. Mackinder showed the British that the only economically successful trans-Europe and Asia railway route would have to be from France to Constantinople, and thence via Turkey and Iran to Kabul, Afghanistan, and thence through the Khyber Pass, through Xinjiang and Inner Mongolia to Shanghai, China, cutting shipping times down very much as compared with the sea routes around Africa to the Orient. Mackinder's counsel was heeded by the British. Mackinder showed the British that Russia could, by taking Afghanistan and Pakistan, reach the Persian Gulf and then come through the Indian Ocean to intercept British cargo ships en route to the Orient. Mackinder identified on the map what he called the heartland. The heart of Mackinder's heartland was Afghanistan, with its Khyber Pass leading to the east and its ability to break through to the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf. Mackinder said, whoever controls the heartland rules the world. Afghanistan was and as yet is the heart of the world's heartland.
And let's pause just for a second here.
Yeah.
Americans wonder why the US military went into Afghanistan after the Russians tried and couldn't. The Russians gave up on trying to take over Afghanistan, and so the US went in there thinking they could take over Afghanistan. And now I see why Afghanistan was such a big deal.
Same thing happened in Vietnam. The French could never control the Vietnamese. The French left, they were replaced by the Americans. The Americans could win in Vietnam.
Yeah.
They've got a history of going places where others have been unsuccessful before them.
And being
Only to have the same
equally
fate.
Guys, it has to do with linking the vast expanse of resources to the vast number of population and extracting value. That's always what it is.
This is such an eye-opener for me.
Yeah, you know, like you see, in terms of resources, you remember, you know, the mapping of the world. When you map, you're mapping resources because you can see with high precision where is the concentration of the resources that are necessary for running our economies and things like that. But also that, you know, you have to link it to where the population is. Remember, you have capital labor and then value extraction. So it's always, you know, when you were reading this, John, I was thinking about how different is it from today? It's the same problem.
Yeah.
It seems to be just the same thing that we are facing. From the bomb, from the nuclear deterrence or whatever, to controlling the conventional and to encircling and controlling access to some places. It seemed to be the same.
Yep. Crazy daisy.
So the type 1 is still controlling everything. I don't know when, you know, Becky and when the type 2 evolution will take hold completely, you know, in such a way that it is clear to everybody that that's the way to go.
Yeah. Okay. We want to read for a little bit more?
Yeah, we'll do
Yeah,
this paragraph.
I suggest that we finish this paragraph, this chapter
The next
completely.
paragraph.
We
So,
finished in Heartland, so it's after World War I.
yeah,
Yeah.
after World War One, the British were so tired that they did not listen to Mackinder as they had before. In the 1920s, he tried to make the British realise that the aeroplane altogether eliminated the world's shorelines as the limit of travel. The British did not see the aeroplane as a cargo carrier and believed that their world trading exclusively by ships of the sea would not be threatened by air traffic. No one had ever flown across an ocean, let alone set up air cargo fleets capable of competing with their seagoing fleets. One of the factors that they failed to envision was that of the technology becoming ever lighter per unit of functional performance until it became feasibly and economically air deliverable. Mackinder developed a doctorate level school in London in the 1920s. One of his students was a talented German named Haushofer, who listened to Mackinder pointing out that the armoured tanks were in effect the Navy destroyers coming out of the sea and running up on the land. Mackinder said to his students, the French Maginot Line and all great fortresses around the world are obsolete. The aeroplane raiders above and the armoured tanks on the land could circumvent, overrun and overfly the fortresses and overwhelm any troops or other defence. Haushofer graduated from Mackinder's school, returned to Germany and went to work for Göring, Hitler's air minister. Haushofer described Mackinder's science in German as geopolitik. From his description of Mackinder's concept, which the British were not heeding, Göring developed his Blitzkrieg lightning war with the Luftwaffe commanding the sky and tanks and other armoured vehicles commanding the land. Göring flew over and rolled over the Maginot Line and took all of took all of Europe. Yes, so the British didn't listen to the one man who understood and tried to tell them. They hung on to old thinking, and that cost them a huge advantage in the war, in the Second World War. So Germans got off to a very good start with a more modern and up-to-date concept.
Wow.
But that bit about the importance of Afghanistan is fascinating. As you say, nation after nation after nation has tried unsuccessfully to control Afghanistan, always at huge expense. The mountains and the people are so rugged that nobody's ever been able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Combination of the terrain and the people.
Yeah. And they're a bunch of little warlords, a bunch of little, little tribes that are competing with each other. You think they're going to let a train or a oil line go through there? Oh, geez. Amazing.
It's not the tribes that are competing against each other, Steve. It is, you have the first polarity between the great powers of the West and the great power of the East, right? Let's say Russia and the US are competing. If they are competing, like immediately, since Russia cannot get to the world ocean, shortest route, which is through Turkey, Iran, and all of this. So you have to have that communication from Russia to the Gulf, and that is through Iran, through Afghanistan. It's the shortest. You control it, you control that road. And remember the resources always. Remember, the Persian Gulf is oil. Russia is strategic minerals, food, right? And then where do you sell them in order to make the money? Is where the populations of the world is. So by the fact that you have that first polarity, you must have a second one in order to close it. I don't know how to express it, but the second one is a consequence of the first polarity. That's to control those resources. You have the US and Russia competing. And with US and Russia competing, there got to be other minor states or other places where they compete. And that creates whatever that we have today in the world. It's always with regard to access to resources, always.
Wow. This thing you read, John, about the Britisher Mackinder developing a strategy that the Germans heeded. I always thought Blitzkrieg, I knew German, so I thought it was about lightning war. I didn't realize it'd be like lightning coming out of clouds, right? In other words, it's the airstrikes.
Yeah, that's right.
Blitzkrieg is a metaphor for airstrike, and I never got that. Knowing,
That
lightning,
I knew, but I didn't understand that the English gave it to them. It was Haushofer studying Mackinder that provided the food for thought for Goring.
Unbelievable.
It's still the military strategy today. Today, the modern
slightly differently, Manu. Yeah. Now what we do is we use drones.
Yes.
And so it's now remote controlled. In fact, there was an American named Jim Channon, whom I met some years ago in the States and then again in Australia, who retired from the Army, I think as a colonel, and was commissioned by the American Army to design the infantry battalion of the 21st century. Channon, at Channon, I think it is, Steve, Jim Channon, and passed away a few years ago, but he was commissioned to come up with a new concept, which was fewer men, more technology. If you think of it, in the early days, it was just cannon fodder, the maximum number of people sent in the hope that enough of them would survive to win the war, whatever the casualties. Now, of course, the humans are much more valuable and there are far fewer of them. So you can give one man in Ukraine a couple of, there he is, that's Jim. What was it called? The Earth Battalion for the 21st century or something or other? Yeah, he was a lieutenant colonel, that's right. Anyway, but if you think of the Ukraine, one of the things the Ukraine's done during the war is to develop drones, which they're now using to strike Russian ships. Because you don't lose your soldiers, you keep them safe and at a distance. You use technology, you send something very small and lightweight. So Bucky's concept of ephemeralization, you're constantly doing more with less in terms of materials. It's much smaller and much lighter. And in fact, in the early days of the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, the Russians were using Iranian drones. They were buying drones in huge numbers from Iran. Apparently, the Iranians produce high-quality military drones. with explosives and whatever else. So there's been extensive use of technology and particularly things like drones in this war, which, as I say, demonstrates Bucky's concept of ephemeralization, but also demonstrates the changing nature of soldiers and the use of soldiers. Yeah.
I'm going to take and put this link in here, John.
Yeah.
In the chat, because evidently he did a TED talk.
I wasn't aware of that. Yep.
And here's the link.
He lived in Hawaii, actually, when I met him.
Yeah, Maui. He's
That was the best place in the world to live. He said where was a particularly favourable place in terms of weather patterns, and he loved Hawaii.
Wow. He's got a hooded leather sleeveless jacket. Very interesting. Wonderful. So I put that in the chat and I'll listen to it after our call. Wonderful. Okay, cool.
We'd better start wrapping up then, hadn't we?
Yeah, I think so. 9:43. Let's see. Let's mark where we left off here. Feasibly deliverable. This is where he left off, right?
Until the end of World War II. No, until the end of World War II. The paragraph that begins until the end of World War II at the bottom of that page is where we start next time.
All right, very good. Let me mark that right now so that good. And
may I suggest otherwise?
Yes.
Otherwise, what?
Otherwise, to what we're doing now.
Oh yes, yes. What do you suggest?
I know John wants to go. To be truthful, we can fly over the remainder of this. We don't have to read, letter by letter and start word game next time, because we've had everything that needed to be said on this paragraph. And when you start next time, I don't know, just to end up with a tail of something, to start with the tail end of something and start a new paragraph doesn't sound very good to me.
Okay, so what, enlighten me here, what page are we on? We're on page.
We are basically 2 pages
on
to the end of the geoscope.
Yeah. Hang on.
And we don't have to read necessarily all of these details, but it is interesting how because if John, unless John is tired to read the page that follow.
I can read another page, don't worry.
Yeah, because see, after that geopolitics.
Okay, well, I marked it.
Until the end of World War II. I think that's where we were.
I have it, but it seems we're going to have to, there's a lot of reading here. We're going to have to haul butt.
I'm just going to capture that. Okay, I'll just close that. Okay,
yeah.
So, where are you? Until the end of World War II, the British had kept the Afghanistan heartland well under control. Then after World War II, they let its militarily guaranteed isolation greatly deteriorate. Meanwhile, the Russians were busy giving Afghanistan such presents as a first-class highway from Russia to Kabul. The USA gave them naught. In 1954, the British Foreign Office advised the US State Department that they had just learned from their ambassador in Kabul, Afghanistan, that Russia, East Germany, Czechoslovakia and China had all installed impressive exhibition buildings in Kabul to take place in Afghanistan's most sacredly important holiday, the Geshen Fair. Neither the United Kingdom nor the USA nor any of their allies had an exhibit in Kabul. I received an emergency call from Jack Massey of the USA State Department's US Information Agency. He asked me how long it would take me to produce a 10,000 square foot floor area geodesic dome so light and compactly shippable that it could be sent by one DC-4 aeroplane to Kabul. My Raleigh, North Carolina shop had it produced in 25 days, complete with a high-tension all-weather skin outwardly tensed to its geodesic tubular aluminium frame. All the struts and hubs of the dome were colour-coded. The 114 feet in diameter dome was test assembled at the Raleigh Airport and accepted by the USA. It was flown to Kabul with one engineering representative to supervise its erection by the Afghans. It was assembled in one day, just in time for the Geshen Fair opening. The USA show inside consisted of the Borden's Laughing Cow, bouncing ball bearings, and Lionel trains. No one showed interest in the show inside, but all the Afghans, the Russians and East Germans, the Chinese and Czechs were fascinated with the geodesic dome itself. The Russians asked permission to bring in their moving picture equipment to make a documentary of the dome construction. The then king of Afghanistan fell in love with the dome. It was a great modern materials Afghan yurt, the Afghans' own architecture. The king asked the USA to give him the dome, but the USA refused. How stupid were they? And sent the dome off as an around-the-world travelling show. The Russians, finding the Afghans making themselves working automobiles out of the most battered second-hand cars shipped into Kabul, and then driving them around on very rough dirt roads, made the Afghans a present of macadam-surfaced first-class roads, which delighted the Afghans because they provided some real distance driving. The Russians extended the highway all the way into the USSR. These roads recently, in 1979, provided the means for the USSR to roll their armed forces into Afghanistan. Having been a long-time student of Sir Halford Mackinder's work, I was fascinated through my dome experience to discover that the US diplomacy apparently knew nothing of Mackinder's heartland concept or considered it to be no longer relevant. Yeah, the Americans are often arrogant. When early in 1979, the USSR took over Kabul, Afghanistan, it was because the balance of world power had shifted from USA to USSR mastery. As we have related, Mackinder had identified the heartland on the maps. The heart of his heartland was Kabul, Afghanistan. Also, the Russians, with their now great navy, had access to the Indian Ocean only at Archangel and the Baltic ports and Vladivostok in North Pacific. With Afghanistan under their control, the Russians were able to control all the northern and eastern borders of Iran and the western borders of Pakistan. Russia always uses the power structure's #1 strategy, divide and conquer, and does so with psychological expertise. She often finds religious divisibility the most propitious. It was feasible in Iran, which could be divided religiously against the incumbent political power, ergo the Muslims, versus the Shahdom of Iran, with knowledge that after driving out the USA-supported Shahdom, the USSR could divide the Muslims into their subsects and militarily overwhelm Iran. The USA secretly supported Kurdish opposition to Russia in Afghanistan and to the Muslims in Iran would become the final obstacle to the Russian century-held objective of gaining direct access to the Indian Ocean and there with complete control of USA access to Arabian oil. The Russians' move into Afghanistan was not just a power structure play. They were exercising their evolutionary ascendancy into the world's top power position. The heartland, Afghanistan, and its ultimate access to the Indian Ocean is the historic prize of the world's top power position. Fortunately for the crossbreeding world citizens of North America and for the rest of the world, the USSR is probably intent on getting the world power structure under irreversible control as quickly as possible so that it can institute controlled demilitarization and thereby turn its immense productivity towards improving the standard of living for the socialist world and thus prove socialism's lifestyle to be equal to or better than the best of the lifestyles produced by capitalism. I am confident that Russia does truly intend world disarmament. She will keep a powerful upper hand at only early stage of disarmament, but will work to have the world's militarily scrapped metals reinvested in peaceful, productive living advantage for all the world's people. I have only one objection to the concept of comprehensive socialism. So far, it has made no provision for effective development of the individual initiative of humans. Too long has the freedom of initiative been usurped either by the Communist Party, representing only 1% of the USSR population, or by the Western world's private enterprises' utterly selfish exploitation for money-making rather than for common sense making. I've discussed this point with the Russians. They admit that a party dictatorship is not democracy, and at the same time also admit that it is for true democracy to which the Russians, the Chinese, and most people of the world aspire. Possibly, the electronically operative democracy and its ability to cope with the complex problem solving will also make safe the realisation of individual initiative to be exercised on behalf of all humanity by any humans anywhere. Okay.
Wonderful. John, you get an Academy Award or something for your hauling butt through there. Manu, thank you for making the suggestion that we finish off chapter 5 so we can start with World Game next time. John, if you caught your breath, how you feeling?
I'm
and
going to
what
have to be quick because my computer's about to go to sleep. I don't have it plugged in and I'm just about to run out of battery.
Go for it.
Yeah, very good. I mean, some interesting things. I mean, I had never thought of Afghanistan as the heartland of control of the oceans and of the Arab world and the importance to everybody, the British, the US and the Russians, except the British and the US forgot about it. How stupid. But to put a geodesic dome in Afghanistan, and the king would like it as a present, and you say, F you, we're taking it out. Why wouldn't you leave it there?
Especially
it's
27
stupid
days. It took 27 days to put the whole thing together and put it
And
on
take it
one
there.
airplane. They could have done another one in a month someplace else.
Yeah, I know. And you could have won some favor with the Afghans. Oh, gee,
Jeez.
such arrogance.
It's because the US didn't think it through. Remember, it was just a stopgap. They called Bucky for a stopgap because somebody
I
told
know,
them
I
that.
know.
That
That was
those
the
guys
best
were there.
exhibit there. The best exhibit there because it represented an Afghan yurt.
Yeah,
It's like
and
the
then it's a success, and they want to show off around the world that we
they
did
take it
this.
away. So stupid. Anyway, thanks for a great day, guys. You may lose me. If my computer fails, I'll be gone.
Okay,
So,
Right.
Manu, how do you feel? What do you take out of today?
I feel great. You know, I feel great. I feel thankful that we stayed because of this. And my takeaway is just a question: how much the problem is still the same?
Oh,
You know, in 50 years, 60 years, we here today, we're still confronting the same problem. And we
40
realize
years.
that
40 years after.
how really to reach that holy grail that Becky was talking about. Because it seems
Living, not
that the
killing.
more capable we are, the farther it is that we are wise.
Hmm.
Using that ephemeralization to improving our standards for everybody.
Hmm.
Not to be socialist, not to be communist, not to be capitalist, but
Yeah.
just saying that we are common indwellers of the same spaceship Earth, and that our destinies are interlinked completely.
Yeah.
So that's what I take away.
Thanks, Manu.
Steve, how do you feel? What do you take away?
I'm excited I can do this very quickly. Hopefully, John, you'll still be here. What I'm impressed with is this idea of this dome and this idea of thinking of the world over time. I'm calling it 4-dimensional thinking. It's the concept of precession and the idea that systems are cyclical. And if we design stuff that way, it's going to go along with our Wednesday morning conversation on ontology of prophets. You know, systems are cyclical, and that's what he was going to do with that 200-foot geodesic globe. I'm grateful for today, John. Thanks for being the Olympic reader. Manu, thank you for your input. And if you get a chance to listen to this, thanks for being here when you could. We'll see you all next week.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.